Evolution in Divine Love is an invitation to reimagine everything from the place where it all begins and where it all returns. Love.
Welcome to our 10th episode of Evolution in Divine Love podcast. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 2, Can God Be Updated? And the section is called, Is God's Perfection a Fixed Maximum? Our first speaker will first be speaking with Swami Padmanabha, the author of Evolution in Divine Love, as well as Inherent or Inherited and Radical Personalism. Later in the conversation, we'll be speaking with Anuttama Citra about this topic. So, welcome, Maharaj. And
thank you. Welcome. My pleasure.
So, in this section, we talk about the becoming of God. So, in many traditions, they equate the perfection with an immutability or a finality. God has a finality. So why does the Bhakti tradition instead emphasize God's perfection as something dynamic and ever expanding? What is it about Bhakti that conception fits better than a finality?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that other traditions in a totality absolutistic way conceive of God's perfection as finality, and only us in the Bhakti tradition are the exclusive ones who see God in a more dynamic way. I will say that every mystical side of every tradition has this insight of God's dynamic perfection, so to say, and every let's say not so mystical side of every tradition, including our Bhakti tradition, thinks of God's perfection in not so perfect way, so to say, just to make justice to what I think is the actual scenario across traditions. So yeah, there is this natural intuition, at least I will say, among the mystics in the Bhakti tradition, that God's perfection, even if we want to use the word, in the case we want to use the word, is not something that brings God to a close, so to say, like creates closure in the infinite, but necessarily it must, as we have said in other episodes, whenever we play out one particular quality of the divine, we have to do so carefully, so all the other qualities are not being canceled or contradicted in the way. So if we want to push the perfection button too much, we have to be careful that we do so in a way that is not doing away with other qualities of the divine. Like, again, being Him, being love, ever evolving, ever dynamic. So yeah, if we want to use the word perfection, we may need to redefine it, because yeah, by definition, today I was checking the etymology of perfection, and basically means completely absolutely perfect, which means something like done. So He's completely done. No? So that's interesting, because even in contemporary language, we may say like, yeah, I'm done. No, I'm done with this. So it doesn't sound too dynamic or too like ever evolving, but on the contrary, you're like exhausted or finished. There is no more room for improvement, so to say. So somehow, in one way, that's the etymology of the word perfect, which brings more limitations and more problems than the ones it solves. So we need to either use another word or redefine perfection as something that allows for a newer, ongoing, further perfection. And yeah, perfection is a foundational basis since forever, Om Purnamada Purnamidam. But on that foundation of perfection, there is no limit to newer degrees of that, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what what a word could be instead of perfection. It seems like it would have to be dynamic, could be in there, or have you thought of a different word?
Actually, now I'm thinking that maybe the best thing to do, maybe not so much which word could replace perfection, but maybe doing away with the whole perfect, imperfect dichotomy altogether somehow, right? Because we tend to think in these dualistic terms. So if something is not perfect, then it's imperfect. And for us, perfect means this very imperfect, limited idea. So what our idea of imperfection then? So again, it very naturally, at least in the mind of most of us, this dichotomy, perfect, imperfect, creates a very avoidable, hopefully, dualism. So rather than looking for a replacement to the word, I would say we get a more accurate picture of the conception of what do we mean by perfection, right? Because again, we have to play out not only the word, but the implications of the word. So most people, perfect means that person has no failure, no imperfection, no I don't know, illusion. And we can agree with that, but at the same time, sometimes the implication of that is you cannot attain a new experience, you cannot grow, expand more in your experience of love, because that will entail that you are not perfect before that. So that's the point where I think we need to explore that more, and maybe ever evolving, dynamic, ongoing will be better words to depict the divine, right? And again, I'm not against the word perfection, but just as long as it allows for further experiences of perfection, considering the nature of love, we have to play out all the things together, right? Like as we have talked before, this insatiable appetite that love in its ongoing nature entails, and how that creates for an ongoing search for more. I have here the book, and there is one nice quote that I don't know if you were planning to bring to the table. If not, I'm doing it right now. Which is a beautiful one by Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor. And he says, the very nature of God's perfection in love imposes a strange kind of limitation upon him. Truly speaking, love can never be perfect, though it may be limitless. By its very nature, it is imperfect. It is never satisfied with itself. So we could use the word imperfect, of course. The more love one has, the more one longs for it. Love is essentially dynamic. It is ever growing, ever trying to overreach itself. Because God's love is limitless, his hunger for love is also limitless. To satisfy his limitless hunger, his effort is equally limitless. So that's a beautiful way to put this perfect, imperfect discussion to, I don't know, to rest forever, but to to send us to a deeper reflection about what do we mean by these words, right?
Yeah. And along these lines, you also mentioned that God's lacking isn't a deficiency, but like in the quote, it's an eternal longing for deeper love. So how does this divine vulnerability shape our relationship with the sweet absolute?
Well, it does from tip to toe, because to begin with, the sweet absolute is all vulnerable, as we always say. He's not only almighty, but all vulnerable. That's what allows God to, how to say, to acknowledge a need, right? To allow himself to be need, to recognize, if we want to use the word, there is a lacking in the context of fullness, because again, we have to speak in paradoxes here. God is full, but he can always become more full. So God is perfect, but he can always be more perfect. So we can use the word imperfect to refine that. Again, these are words. But vulnerability is necessarily there, because that's what allows us, to acknowledge that there is something to be fulfilled in us, that we need something, and that And sometimes that we even need help for that to happen. So if that takes place on God's part, what to speak on our side, right? Any actual relationship required some form of vulnerability to blossom. So if we are speaking about the most important relationship, then we are speaking about the deepest degree of vulnerability. The most important expression of vulnerability has to be present there. Will be kind of a currency in that market of divine love, because ultimately divine love by nature invites everyone to undress themselves, so to say, sarvo padi vinir muktam, right? To get absolutely free from all false constructs, from all false designations. So it's a type of undressing of the false self to the absolute degree. So that's pretty vulnerable, but that's what love requires. Again, God or love or mercy, as we used to talk, may be costless, but it's never priceless. So there is a price to pay to perceive and properly honor the unmerited gift. And yeah, vulnerability may well be that coin.
And it seems that vulnerability also kind of opens the door for us to be able to serve. If God is vulnerable, then a need is created, I mean, and it's an opening for us to be able to render service, to step into the relationship.
Yeah, because you cannot render service if you don't identify with the particular need for service. So if God is in need, if God is vulnerable, if God is required in need of love, again, as paradoxical as it may sound for some of us still, for us to tend to that need, we need first of all to identify that need, to identify with that need, and behind that need there is vulnerability. Identifying with that vulnerable need, we become vulnerable ourselves by way of Tadatmya, by way of empathy. So there's no way to escape from vulnerability in the context of offering service for the right reason, so to say, from the right motivation, from the right place.
I actually want to go back to the idea of perfection. I was thinking, if it is a moment by moment thing, like I'm trying to relate it to something from this world, like when they're trying to design a phone, for example, like, so they can have an idea for what is needed. Like, okay, the phone should have these features and this and that. And when it is done, then you can say like, okay, it's perfect. But also knowing that it's not like a maximum, like a fixed maximum or the end, we are aware that it's going to evolve, like the needs are going to evolve, and that there's going to be a newer version. Pretty much the same with everything, So I was thinking, if even in this world, perfection, even when we use the word as if it is like a final thing, it's never really a final thing. We kind of are aware that it is going to change. But what comes to my mind is, then can you call the previous version imperfect? So how does that play out when we talk about God? Like his previous version, I don't think it is imperfect. But with things we can say, okay, it's the old black and white phone, maybe that's imperfect now. So many things you can't do. So yeah, what would you say to that?
I will say that the black and white phone was probably perfect for the needs of the time, no? And now the needs are others, so we require new update in perfection. But we wouldn't look back and say that was imperfect. It's just that version no longer holds up with the requirements of the present moment. So in some, again, we are just giving analogies and using words, right? But we could say that God, I wouldn't say the word imperfect either, of course. God, by definition and foundation, again, Om Purnamada, it's perfect. And whatever comes from the perfect is perfect, interestingly. So it's not only limited to God to say God is perfect and complete, but everything else by extension as well. But that doesn't mean, again, that this is there's, in one sense, as you gave the example of the phone, there's no final version. I don't think anyone in this world is thinking, okay, one day we'll have the final iPhone version and we won't need any further updates. That's not happening with anything. So there's no final version, there's no final update, because necessities keep happening, as you were saying. And again, we're giving an example, a limited example with technology in this world, but try to apply that to the ever unfolding needs that come in the context of love. So how much that, even if we want to speak about love as the ultimate technology, yeah, there are always new needs. So you need a new level of technology, love, to match the latest needs, the latest update of love to match the latest need created by love. So that's the dynamics of love. But yeah, I wouldn't call that, of course, again, the previous versions imperfect. I would say that love in its own dynamic, as the quote from Obi-Al Kapoor that I shared, it's always unpacking, unfolding, progressing, growing. And in that context, new needs come. So a previous version of love of God is not enough. It's not enough for God himself. That's what keeps the whole word of Lila in our tradition going on. There's always a new level of tending to love's necessities. These days, this type of self-definition came to my mind. I would think, that would be a good way of trying to say who I am, or who I trying to be, not who I am. I like to become, but aspiring to tend love's necessities. No, we are, and it's not only me, of course. We are all on this path of sacred love, aspiring to tend the ever new necessities of love. No, so, and again, we wouldn't look back and say, let's say you are in Golok Vrindavan, the spiritual world. Nobody will say, oh, what happened yesterday was imperfect, right? Now it's perfect. So that's why I said a few minutes ago, maybe we need to dispense with the terms altogether, perfection, imperfection, because sometimes they may not give the full picture of what's taking place, right? So, but I appreciate the analogy you gave. It's good.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And it did occur to me that, yeah, we actually don't look back and say the black and white phone is not perfect. We actually appreciate what it did at the time. Like,
yeah.
And yeah,
probably we were even blown up, like, wow, this is incredible. This is beyond my wildest imagination. Now we will look back and say, what was that? Again, by comparison, but if you really travel to the moment, nobody will thinking this is so imperfect. Everyone was like, wow, this is allowing so much, facilitating. So yeah, at the time that was a perfect facilitator. After some time, we need an update to that. It doesn't mean we are ungrateful, we are critical, we are labeling that as imperfect, just necessities unfold, and a matching level of creativity has to unfold to serve those necessities. Let's put it that way.
That makes me wonder then, like, where can we use the word imperfect?
That's why in the book I wrote a section called Spiritual Imperfectionism, right? Because I make that point, right? If in one sense we cannot speak conclusively about perfection, because it's not a fixed maximum, it's something that continues to unfold. If we cannot put our finger in a definitive way and say this is absolute final perfection, how much we can put a finger in the opposite and say this is imperfection? No? Because it's so relative. Like Bhakti Thakur will say, today's perfection is tomorrow's imperfection. So, but what's tomorrow's imperfection for you? Maybe tomorrow's perfection for someone else, depending where they are in their journey, right? So again, how much we can label things for those two terms, that's in itself an interesting question. Because the way we tend to use those two words, in general at least, it's very limiting and limited. Like generally, imperfect means one thing and perfect means one thing. And that's not true. So that's why I'm saying maybe we need to put those two words to rest for a few decades and just learn to accept reality for what it is without the temptation of labeling, is this perfect or imperfect? Because again, it's a constant flow of updating and necessities. And so from one valid question will be, from which place comes the necessity to label reality as perfect or imperfect, right? And maybe another contemplative pause for all of us to sit for a while with that.
Definitely. We are sitting in a pause.
Yeah. I think this is where we should.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting with the words, like literally not just perfect and imperfect. It seems to me a lot of the words, it often means something for, like, each one of us have like our own understanding of the words. I was just recently like watching a clip, just a short clip of like a Gen Z English. I couldn't understand a word, like, so it's interesting how language is evolving and how the words are losing like meaning or even changing how we understand. So yeah, perfect and imperfect.
Yeah, and again, when we try to apply language to the infinite, that's even all the more overwhelming, because there is a point that words do not suffice. So it's a wise decision to know when to stop resorting to words and go for the experience, so to say, that words may be trying to point to, right? Like in the famous conversation between Sri Chaitanya Deva and Ramananda Roy, where at one point of the conversation, Sri Chaitanya covers Ramananda's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that's a sign of, in other traditions, that's a sign of enlightenment, like the mouth covered, like implying we've reached another level where using words will be a disservice to this reality, right? So I think it's important to consider all that. And as much as we like and need to use words, we are doing that a lot here. Yeah, it's good to humble and sober our speaking with non-speaking, balancing our knowing with the unknowing, and so on and so forth. So maybe all that to say, it's a good point to put our discussion to rest now.
Welcome to the second part of this episode. We'll be welcoming Anuttama Citra from Chennai. She's our sister and friend, and she's going to share her thoughts, her ideas, her perspectives on this fascinating topic of, is God a fixed maximum? So welcome, Anuttama.
Thank you for having me here, Bhakti Rasa. It's a pleasure being a part of this discussion with you and Shweta. I'm also looking forward.
Thanks. So to kick off this conversation, I'm wondering, when you first hear that God's perfection is not a static maximum, but an endless unfolding, what comes to mind?
In fact, when you presented this topic to me and asked me if I would like to be and invited me for this discussion, and I was just sitting and reflecting on this topic without really reading up on anything because I wanted to approach this topic also from a blank slate. And I thought some ideas would pour in as I'm sitting with that topic, but I was feeling blank. I was sitting with a sense of silence and nothing was coming up. And I was feeling so anxious. It's like, oh my gosh, I said that I'll, come for the discussion, and I'm not. I'm experiencing a writer's block of sorts. So I was just sitting with a sense of curiosity to see what this silence was speaking to me. And what I connected with was a sense of overwhelm that by the time words come out of my mouth, God would already have crossed the limits of those words. So to me, I was sitting with a sense of overwhelm that, whatever I speak is not sufficient in one sense. So yeah, it was kind of humbling then to know that God doesn't have a fixed maximum, and words have their own limits, and he can always, or they can always cross the limit of the words that I speak. Yeah, so I think that was my first experience sitting with the topic, sense of overwhelm.
Those are great points. Yeah. The limitation of of language for a number of reasons, and one of them being because they can no longer accurately describe God because he's now at this moment, at the end of your sentence, at the end of your breath, something more. Yeah, that's very awesome. So this, I think we had a talk also one time about perfectionism. Part of that conversation, and just the idea itself about being perfect and what that means, to have a perfect God and ourselves to be some resemblance of perfection and how that affects us. Do you have any thoughts about just the idea of perfection and what that means?
Yeah. So to me, as I was reading the section on perfection and relation with God, to me, the image or the visualization that I was sitting with was I'm walking into a playground dressed in summer clothes, and then there is another person walking in with armor tip to toe, and now I'm sitting with a sense of awkwardness as to how I should relate with that person, because I'm dressed so lightly and that person is totally covered up. So to me, that's how perfection as a label felt. A label, or in other words, is how Maharaj calls it now. So to then approach God as someone who is perfect in all aspects. One is I find myself being very self-conscious in approaching him. It feels wrong to be vulnerable or to be myself around him. It feels as if I need to fix myself before I approach that perfect entity. And even if I do work on myself and still approach him, it somehow feels that it can never be enough. So I would find myself being on edge in approaching someone who is perfect, who has no vulnerabilities whatsoever, who is sufficient in themselves, and having achieved perfection, I find myself being conscious of how he or they are looking at me, because I'm nowhere close to perfection. So yeah, those were a couple of ideas that I was sitting with surrounding perfection.
So,
I think, yes, yeah, go ahead, Bhakti Rasa.
I was just going to say, so for you, God's vulnerability actually is an access point. It allows you then to be vulnerable and to be able to approach them.
Yeah, totally. It makes them relatable. Otherwise, they feel so far distant, somewhere seated on the pedestal, out of my reach, and probably never someone I can access. So, and to me, that takes away the whole essence of bhakti, which is to connect with divinity. To me, when the connection itself is lost, then what exactly am I? What process am I undertaking? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think this idea of perfection that is presented to us growing up, like I see it's a bit, the dysfunction is there, like it's not so much with real perfection, because I think there is perfection in each moment. It's not to say that like, we are imperfect now and that like at certain point in the future, we will become perfect. I was actually like, thinking of how, our school system, I don't know how it is in the West, but in India, like we had this 100 as the fixed maximum, so you get 100, that means you're the best. Anything less than that, you're not good enough. It's not perfect, so I think that's where we kind of get this dysfunctional idea about what perfect is, and then we kind of think, okay, perfect is, there's a fixed thing like perfection, and we're always trying to reach that, and funny enough, we are never going to reach that because it's not a fixed maximum, like we learned in this section, right? And I really like one part, like in the section where Maharaj says, if we redefine the perfection as the ideal relationship between God and the entire reality in any given moment, a more fluid and expansive understanding of perfection emerges, one that we may urgently need. So it's like, if we are looking at perfection as being present in each moment, then we are not really aiming for something in the future, yeah, that's what I'm thinking, about the idea of perfection that we grow up with.
Yeah. And I totally relate with that idea of culturally indoctrinated perfection, especially in Indian culture, because having experienced the schooling here, I also have experienced something similar to how 100 is seen as the standard or yardstick for perfection. And anything short of that is deemed imperfect or you're lacking. So, and to me, that's why perfection as exclusively as a noun alone, it doesn't suit or land well with me, given my conditioning, prior conditioning, because I do find myself projecting, the cultural conditioning of perfection onto God. So that's why I somehow see I'm a lot more comfortable when there is also perfection as verb included into the picture. And so to me, then perfection as a verb implies that there is no final destination. Even God is constantly becoming. So it it seems as if he is sufficient in the here and now, but there is also parallelly something that he's lacking. So his sufficiency becomes a point of new beginning, then to uncover, that which is divinely lacking, and that's what, in one sense, makes God also relatable, because I also see myself as lacking. So it feels so okay, experientially okay, to approach God even if I am lacking. Of course, not to say that my lacking is the same as the experience of God's own lacking. But somewhere there is just a sense of okayness around, the term or linguistic language of it's okay to not be there yet, because even God is not there yet. And probably there is no there, a final destination yet, in one sense. So I think somewhere that that eases me, that it's okay to be in light summer clothes. I don't have to be on an armor.
Nice. An example came to mind about this fixed maximum thing. In gymnastics, it used to be 10 was the top. 10 was all you could get, 10 points. A perfect score was 10 points. But what happened over time is that when they created the criteria of 10, the ability and the capacity of gymnasts was a certain thing. But then they surpassed all of the abilities that made a 10 a 10, and they had to like increase it. They had to increase, okay, well, now the maximum is 12, now the maximum is 15, now the maximum is 20, just because the gymnast's capacity to do more, their own skill, their own abilities evolved themselves and surpassed what used to be a fixed maximum. So that's kind of an interesting example as to how, God what was the maximum at one moment is no longer the maximum, because the person on the other side is still becoming. So it pushes the boundary and the definition of what perfection is. It's perfection in motion. So it's
That's brilliant. I really like that example. And it also, like, I was connecting with what Anuttama was saying about God's lacking. It's like the lacking comes from the fullness, right? Like here with the gymnastics, when they reach 10 on 10, there is the fullness, but there's still a lacking, like they want to do more, So it's like the lacking comes from the fullness, but where perfection is already present, and there is a need for further perfection.
And I think that was a beautiful point that both of you made, that 10 as the beginning point of something new, of their potential to become more than 10, and how there is also a sense of fullness in the experience, and the lacking kind of comes from that. And what I was also connecting with is the theme of divine love, how in experiencing love to the fullest, it also creates a desire for more, or a greed for more. So there is fullness, and yet there is a scope of experiencing more of that. And to me, that also determines how there is no fixed maximum, because then the loving exchanges keep evolving. It's infinite. So so in the fullness of experiencing love, it creates more thirst for love, and how evolution or movement happens in that process.
Yeah, another thing I was thinking about this idea of perfection, right? It's actually such a harmful thing, like one thing I found out recently is that um, one of the reasons, maybe one of the big reasons behind procrastination is perfectionism. That blew my mind actually, and I could relate to it so much because there's so many things I don't get to just because I know I can't finish it. Like, even just the chores in the house. Like, oh, I don't want to get to it now because I can't finish it. This is something it would take like a few days or whatever. So I'll do it later when I have time. So that's how I just procrastinate. And yeah, when I read about it, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. And that's why I think this is such a harmful idea that is put into us. The idea of like, a fixed maximum, like a perfection like that, which really makes us inefficient and like, slow. We're trying to rush, like same in our Bhakti project, we just think there's somewhere to be, like a goal, and then we want to rush and be there already, not appreciating where we are, because where we are is also perfect in this moment, because that's exactly where we are supposed to be, meant to be, or whatever it is, so this moment is already perfect, but we always dream of a future moment, a goal, a fixed maximum perfection that's somewhere ahead, so yeah, I think it's really helpful to understand there is no fixed perfection. Like where we are, each moment is perfect already, like it's like this also this is where I also connect the mantra Om Purnam, like everything that's emanating from God is perfect, so that's how I see it. Every moment is perfect in itself already, because yeah, that's all emanations from the divine.
That is so deep. That's beautiful. Yeah, I really value that point. Do you have a comment on that, Anuttama?
Yeah, I'm kind of still processing that
Okay. Yeah, it was
because
and
that was quite profound. So I'm also sitting with what Shweta was saying.
yeah. And this idea, it does set it up where we're always in comparison, and therefore we never it robs us of the present moment.
Mhm.
And the it also doesn't allow us, we're not realistic. It creates, I think, a falsehood, and always trying to perform and to appear perfect, to think that we actually can be. And when we fall short of that, then there's something wrong with us. We're broken. We're not going to fit in. People aren't going to like us. We're not able to make mistakes, small or big. So yeah, the idea of perfectionism and how that is a huge factor in procrastination, because we're afraid of failing, afraid of failure. So if I can't be perfect, I don't want anybody to know that. I don't want anybody to know that I'm not perfect. So better that I just don't try it, because good God, if I make a mistake, then they'll know. But yeah, imperfection is there.
Yeah, and also in the human experience of perfection, what also makes it dysfunctional is the self-criticism that comes along with falling short of standards, and where I really beat myself up to the point of probably even feeling that I would better off not exist than, be such a flawed existence. So I can see how perfection can be dysfunctional, not just in procrastinating or being present to the present, but also in devaluing the worth of one's own existence. And in how Maharaj has presented the idea of perfection as not being fixed maximum. I could see how perfection in the realm of divine love is nothing close to, what I have, and so many people around me are experiencing perfection in their day-to-day interactions or in their conditioned ways of perceiving perfection.
I think a key of it is what Swetadvipa brought up about each moment being the point of perfection. It's not that we need to seek perfection that looks a certain way, is a certain way, that is really down the road, but I'm going to try to be that here now. But to be present now in this moment and to meet this moment as exactly where I am, that is the perfection of the moment. Not that I have to develop myself in a certain way or, do a certain thing according to someone's standards, but the standard is to be fully here now in this present moment with all of my failures, with all of my lackings, with all of my abilities, whatever it is at that time. So yeah, the perfection doesn't exist outside of this moment, and it's a string of flow of moments.
Yeah. And I think that's how I appreciate appreciate seeing perfection as the process of becoming, rather than 100 on 100 in the present and then beating myself up for not having achieved 100 yet. So then in that case, when perfection becomes more about becoming more of who I am, while parallelly integrating the shadow and the bright sides of being human. I can appreciate perfection as a process and not so much as a destination. So that's another way how I'm starting to see perfection. That it's not a goal to achieve, but a process that's happening in the here and now.
Yeah. Or I guess you could also see it like a goal by moment. What's the goal of the moment, and you've already achieved that based on how you can show up. Like, I really like what Bhaktirasa was saying about what is the standard? The standard is to be present in the here and now. So if that is our standard and, every moment, then we show up according to our capacity and what we can offer in the moment, being in the here and now, that being the standard, then we've already achieved a perfection. There's no question of even like that being anywhere else. That's okay, this moment is perfect. What's next? Like that's kind of how I am seeing it. That there's nothing wrong so much maybe to say, there is a goal. I'm thinking that the goal could be modified to have it by moment. Like with our earlier discussion with Maharaj, we were talking about this, about cell phones and how like the black and white cell phones, years ago, like now it's not enough. But like when they first came out, they were perfect. They were perfect for the moment. And then something else, the needs evolved, and today we have something else. But yeah, that doesn't become imperfect, or like it doesn't mean that it was less and it had to be somewhere else. So that's kind of how I am seeing this, that we are reaching the goal in one sense every moment.
It ties in, I think, with also the potency plus potential.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Within everything, there is that potential, and that it's the potential for moreness, not necessarily for like a a long trajectory of perfection, but there's always the potential for moreness, and that moreness is what keeps us going and evolving and expanding. So you had something, Anuttama?
Yeah, I was about to respond to Shwetadeepa's point on the goal. So the way I am understanding then is that the goal is a part of the process. So yeah, so in one sense there is no demarcation of where the process is or where the process ends or goal begins. It's like the goal is so much a part of the process. So yeah, that's how I'm understanding that.
So if God is hungry for love, which you brought that up, that Maharaj mentions in the book, how does that change the way that we pray, love, and live our own lives, knowing that that God has a hunger for love?
Me personally, I would feel excited to show up if I know that the other person is hungry or wants something that they see in me. See that I have something that they are greedy about. And when it comes in the context of loving exchange, I think somehow there is the excitement then of, oh, this person needs this, so I would like to offer more of that. And so somewhere I feel invited and welcomed in his greed. So, and I somehow feel that there is no limit to how much more I would feel invited into that greed. So, if on the contrary, if I see God only as someone who's self-sufficient and who doesn't yearn for anything, or who doesn't need anything, then I really then find myself questioning, okay, what exactly is my role in this relationship if there's nothing that God wants out of me? So, so I think somehow the whole process kind of becomes monotonous, boring. If I may say so. Yeah, but when I know that there is something that I can offer, I feel encouraged to show up.
Yeah, and that really is created. Again, we mentioned it earlier, by God's vulnerability, creates a necessity and a place for us to be able to kind of plug in. It reminds me of how Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I believe, was hankering to leave to pass away at Kurukshetra, because that is where Sri Radha has her greatest necessity in that moment. So when God has a necessity, it creates a service opportunity for us to be able to relate, for us to be able to plug in. But if God is completely only self-satisfied and only complete without the other part of the paradox, then there's not much room for us to be able to access, to approach, to enter, to interpenetrate, actually, to have an effect on God. A vulnerable God is a God who can be affected, and that's beautiful.
It reminds me of the line, necessity is the mother of invention. So, it's like if there is no necessity, almost it's like there is no further perfection, So when you were giving the example of Kurukshetra, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wants to be there to serve Sri Radha. And that's there is a necessity, and there is an opportunity to serve in like ever new ways.
Creative.
Creative, yeah.
And what also stood out for me in what I was listening to both of you was one, the point on paradox that God is also self-satisfied, but then he also creates more. He is also greedy. And also how God becomes vulnerable in the realm of divine love or in the face of divine love. And to me, one, the idea of having a fixed maximum limits the possibilities of such paradox, mysteries, and novelty discoveries from playing out. And another aspect is of God being vulnerable in divine love. And to me, the pinnacle of divine love is Sri Radha. And of course, I've been sitting with this ever since Radhashtami happened. The reflection that I've been sitting with is that how her own love for God is ever increasing, and God is impacted by that love. So he, and in that impact, he is constantly becoming more. And in his becoming, she is attracted and drawn even further. So there is this dynamic exchange of, loving reciprocations. And to me, that movement becomes limited if I were to see God as having a fixed maximum. Because God as having a fixed maximum would then mean that that limit of fixed maximum is set on everything else connected with him. And in one sense, everything is connected to him.
I would think
Yeah.
by now he would have hit his maximum already by now if it was fixed. Right? I mean, he's been around for quite a while. Surely he would have hit it by now. So it must be ongoing. And
and if he were to continue, if he were to continue being in that fixed maximum that he has already achieved, then probably that sounds like a state of stagnation and not so much moving, internally moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how like it is sometimes necessary to have this like perfection, like temporary perfection, you can call it, I think. I'm kind of thinking about like races and stuff, like what do you call it? Like athletes, like when you have that, when you have a start point and an end point. So you need to have an end point. You can't say, oh, keep running, like crossing perfection. So I'm kind of, this thought just comes up for me now, like how do we view that, that it's not that now to say, oh, there is no perfection, no goal, like just be free and do whatever, so maybe it is somehow helpful to have like goals or like certain like perfection, like temporary perfection, if we can understand it that way. Like, do you have any thoughts? Like,
and I think that's what Maharaj has beautifully integrated perfection as both noun and verb. So it's not noun or verb, it's both. So I also resonate with that, how yes, there is a state of achieving a form of perfection, And once that is achieved, that becomes a new beginning to a newer unfolding.
Yeah, always unfolding. And then kind of just going, what popped into my mind, Dweep, when you gave that example about the runners and the athletes, and there's a starting point and an end point. We can consider perhaps that's a moment. And within that moment, there's always a moreness. Like say you have, I don't know, 10 meters that you're running. I have no idea how long 10 meters is because I don't know the metric system, but 10 meters. But there's always the challenge to do that faster. So within a parameter, even, there is the ability to be more present, to do more. So like the moreness, even in the present moment. Whereas even that is based, within a fixed parameter. But how we can always show up more, we can always do more within that fixed container, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because there can be so much happening, right? Like this example of running, there's so much going on. So yeah, each time, like if we're repeating it, like even if it is like, say the same container, then each time you can go deeper and deeper into the experience. And in that sense, there's never like one perfect way of doing it. Can always go deeper.
Yeah, we can always peel another potato in a deeper way. Yeah. So let's see. Here's a reflection for you, Anuttama and Dweep. What resonates with you most in the idea that God defines himself in the Bible as I will be who I will be? And as Ilia Delio brilliantly puts it, not so much Godhead, but God ahead. So what, and also, God of rather than God of the past. So what resonates in you with this notion of God ahead, and I will be who I will be?
Really came up for me was the idea of God discovering himself, because what lies ahead, that is all that God can be. There is some sense of unknown even for them. And to me, that adds a sense of novelty, where I don't know what I'm going to become ahead. But when that happens, it feels so new. And that's why it's a discovery. It was a mystery for a reason, and it's discovery once that happens. Yeah, so to me, somehow the idea of I will be indicates how God also has the potential of becoming more of who they are in the moment. And there's so much scope of mystery and unknown in that becoming, in the face of which it's humbling to know that I haven't discovered God, or God isn't limited to my understanding of who they are in the here and so. And somehow the flip side of that would be cognitive rigidity and a sense of, oh, I know who God is. Now I want you to see God the way I see him, or I see them. And yeah, that's the shadow side of not acknowledging that it's not just Godhead, but there is also God ahead.
It kind of, since God doesn't know who he will be in the future, what he will be like. He hasn't experienced himself there yet. He's not there yet. It kind of puts omniscience. We really need to redefine omniscience then. If God doesn't even know himself, does he know? Can he know all the other things that don't exist also? So the idea of becomingness, the idea of flow, the idea of things that of evolution itself, God not knowing himself, coming into being, coming into fuller being in multidimensional ways, and he doesn't know that. So how do we define omniscience?
And that's the paradox. There is some part that he knows, and there is something that he doesn't know, and that's also himself. And he's also rediscovering himself through the eyes of love. So there is newness in that as well. And one more thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention before was about how the idea of God having no fixed maximum leaves a lot of scope for discovery and novelty. It also leaves me with the scope of God being unpredictable. But unpredictable doesn't mean they're unreliable. That's something I just wanted to put it out there, because otherwise, to just stay with the possibility of God being ever changing, then it's like, okay, if he's constantly changing, then what am I to expect of my relationship with them? It feels, to some, it may feel destabilizing. So, paradox. Both exist, coexist.
Yeah, it's not a perfect relationship then. Yeah. What came to my mind about God, this idea of God ahead is how they say the yogis can meditate like for years and years and they cannot catch God. They cannot catch Krishna. So it's like, yeah, he's always, you try and catch and he's already something else, something new, so in that sense he cannot be caught unless, I mean, I don't know if there's an unless, because maybe there is, because they do say only like, by his mercy he reveals himself to his devotees. So even that, I think, like, it's everything, like all of that would happen in the moment, like even if he does reveal like himself, in the next moment both are evolving, like the devotee and God. So yeah, in that sense, maybe like nobody can catch him ever. He's always got ahead, but at the same time, whatever we catch is perfect.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It also reminds me, of course, of Mother Yashoda trying to tie Damodar.
Yeah.
First she had to catch him, and then she couldn't tie him. It was only by him allowing that to happen that she was able to actually tie him.
Yeah. He was always 2 inches too short. Always ahead.
Yep. He was always 2 inches ahead, at least.
Yeah. And if you consider like each moment to be eternal, then that part of her trying to catch and him falling, not falling, him, the rope being 2 inches too short, is always going to be 2 inches too short. It's an eternal moment.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you have other thoughts on it, Tom?
Yeah, it also reminded me of this verse in Ishopanishad, where it says that God is, in one sense, fixed in his abode, but then he is also moving, moving faster than the speed of the mind. And it's interesting, there's a comparative degree used, and it's like faster than the speed of mind. There is no set limit how fast it is. It's just faster than mind. So it can also always be more faster than how fast he can be. And then he's within, and yet he's outside of everything. And then so many other such paradox. So that's how I was kind of connecting with the paradox of how God is beyond reach, and like how Prabhupada often also says that God makes himself accessible in the form of deity or in the form of painting, in order to ensure that a connection can be established. Because if there is someone who's completely beyond my faculties of knowing or perceiving, then where is the question of forming a connection? So I'm also seeing how paradoxes are coexisting. Like you cannot really, in one sense, capture him, but then he's also letting himself be captured. And it may seem as if I'm kind of going a little off topic here, but when I was sitting with that reflection, I was quite moved by how there is empathy from his end, that empathy of human limitedness in connecting with him, and how he then makes himself approachable. And it's not just in one way. There are multitude of ways that he's making himself accessible. So just because he's making himself accessible doesn't mean that he has become limited. So I think that is something to be mindful of.
He's unlimitedly accessible.
This reminds me again of this example I was giving of runner athlete. It's like a container, even though it kind of seems limited, like you were giving the example of deity worship, like that's presented to us, made available to us, so that you can see as a container where we can go deeper and deeper. So it doesn't mean it's limited. It can be a container, but within that container there's always like deeper possibilities. Like it can keep the perfection, can keep exceeding the previous reaches.
Yeah. Beautiful. And you don't have to go anywhere.
No.
Yeah.
It's all here.
Beautiful, ladies. Is there anything else anyone would like to bring up before we put this episode to rest, as it's said?
I'm not seeing if there's something that I wanted to share that I have not. Shwetadeepa, if you have something to share, then please go ahead. Okay.
All right. We will then take our pause here and offer a few questions and thoughts for contemplation for our audience to be able to bring this important topic into your own lives.
Take a moment to reflect on your personal beliefs about perfection and completeness. Have you seen these qualities as a fixed peak, an unchanging maximum that can never be exceeded? Or are you open to the idea of perfection as an ever-unfolding expansion? Consider how embracing either perspective might influence your understanding and pursuit of perfection in your own life.